Alright, this is Chat UTD and this is my take on a year of INEOS. Normally within the first year of a relationship you have a honeymoon period, you have lots of firsts and lovely things that happen and you can't live without them, etc. This is not the case. The only honeymoon period we had with INEOS was probably from around January to April, when the propaganda machine was in overdrive and we were told a lot of mistruths about what to expect from their time at United and what they intended to do. They started off on a bad footing for me because they enabled the Glazers to stay, and I did a video in October 2023 saying INEOS getting the deal done to take 25 whatever it was percent of United was the death knell of the club, was Armageddon. United would cease to be a serious football club, and I've seen nothing in the last year to disprove that theory. That was born out of emotion and born out of disappointment, but it still stands true for me today. As I said at that time, they didn't have enough money to do what needs to be done. That was always the glaringly obvious problem, really. And again, I've seen nothing to suggest that that's not the case. I am going to go through in chronological order the decisions they've made and their time at the club so far, and obviously it's an opinion piece, so people obviously can disagree or agree, and hopefully it sparks some form of conversation. Before we get into the actual chronological order of what they've done, in February of 2024, so just about a year ago now, Sir Jim Ratcliffe for the first time was interviewed by a series of media outlets, and the one that caught my eye was an interview with Dan Rowan from BBC Sport. It was the most free-ranging, wide-ranging interview that he did, and I recorded a video for Chat UTD and I made my observations on that, and those observations were made on assumptions that Sir Jim Ratcliffe and INEOS wanted to bring United back to being an elite football club again, that they would look to create and generate an environment and a culture of excellence. And when he was pushed in that interview as to how long it would take for United to be truly competitive again, he made the mistake of answering, and he made the mistake of saying 2 to 3 years, which, given we're a year down the line and we're as bad as we've ever been, now looks like a hilarious statement to make, to be honest. And throughout this video, I'm going to keep coming back to three things really. There's no money to do what they need to do. Are they really encompassing an elite environment? Are they really cultivating an elite environment? And three, how likely is it that we're going to be able to do what needs to be done in 2 to 3 years? Let's start then with, in chronological order of the decisions that they made. So the first decision was that they appointed Berrada as the chief executive, and they appointed Dan Ashworth as the director of football. On the face of it, two very smart appointments. The issue was neither of them were available to start until June, July, and this was in January when those announcements were made. Now, one of the issues here is that when you haven't got the money to do what needs to be done, and you are so far away from where you are aspiring to be, you need people like that in the room yesterday, not tomorrow, let alone in 5 months' time. And you need to get every single decision right. You need to get everything you're doing right. The fact that those two weren't around was used as a reason / excuse for the procrastination on Ten Hag, for their lack of a clear out in the summer of the players, and it was used as a reason why the assessment process, if you like, what did they call it, a strategic review, was not as complete as they would want it to be by the end of the season, because those two people weren't in the building. Well, in that case then, really, we haven't got time to waste, so perhaps they should have chosen people who could start straight away. So were they bad appointments? Don't know. I've seen nothing from Berrada, never heard him open his mouth with anything interesting to say, and Dan Ashworth left after 5 months, so it doesn't look that good, does it? Those two appointments don't look that clever at the moment. I'm going to come back to Ashworth in a little bit. The next big decision they had to make was, what do you do with Ten Hag at the end of the season? Do you sack him or do you keep him? And no doubt in my mind, they made a decision based on sentiment after the FA Cup final. There's really good sources that say that's not the case. They didn't do that. Well, if they'd have lost the FA Cup final, Erik Ten Hag would have been sacked, 100%. So for me, they did. They kept him on a wave of sentiment after we won the FA Cup. And if you're going to do that, okay, I think that's a mistake. That's mistake one. But just do it. Don't leave it 2 weeks and openly talk to other managers about taking the job and then give him a bolt-on 1-year contract that was there anyway, really, as an extension if you wanted to sign it. Because that completely takes away all power he's got, completely undermines him. And every single Man United fan, whether they were a fan of Ten Hag or not, said he'll be gone before Christmas. So if we know that, punters, fans, Joe Averages, if we know that, how do people like Omar Berrada and Dan Ashworth not know that? But because they didn't start in January, because they weren't in the building, no. If you've got a phone, you can have a conversation about whether you fancy the manager or not. That was used as an excuse, as far as I'm concerned, as to why they dilly-dallied and then ended up not doing anything, essentially, and giving him that 1-year extension, which was already there as an option anyway. And that was a big mistake. They shouldn't have kept him. And it's cost us. It's cost us the start to our season, the upheaval then of changing the manager, and the squad not being conducive with that manager's style of play. All kinds of knock-on effects, which I'll probably get into as we go along. The next issue was the summer. There was no clear out in the summer. They needed a root and branch clear out of that squad. Last season was absolutely abysmal. And it's no coincidence that with the team that's pretty much the same as last season with the odd addition here or there, we're having an equally poor season this season. In fact, it's worse. The big one that needed to leave was Rashford. This is where first time I'm going to come back to that Sir Jim Ratcliffe interview where he spoke about being elite. He cannot have watched Man United from January until the end of the season, and I'm sure he must have watched us before that as well, and watch Marcus Rashford and say, there's an elite athlete. There's nothing about Marcus Rashford that's elite. He is the epitome of everything I don't like about modern day football players, and Jim Ratcliffe's nearly 30 years older than me, so I imagine he must share the same sort of opinions, and he's got the keys to the kingdom to make these decisions. I come back to the second thing I said I was going to keep coming back to, or one of the things I'm going to keep coming back to. Probably the reason he couldn't get rid of Rashford, probably the reason they couldn't do the root and branch clear out, is that these players are on astronomical wages because idiots that were employed by the Glazers gave them those contracts, and therefore other clubs don't want to buy them, and we haven't got the money to have reduced transfer fees or supplement their wages like we probably would have had if we had a full takeover. So the lack of ability to do a clear out is linked to that. But it means, how are you going to be elite? How are you going to be an elite team when you've got to keep players who've just had the worst season in Man United's Premier League history? The other criminal act they committed in the summer was they didn't bring in a goal scorer and they didn't bring in a left back. Terrible decisions, which again have hampered us as the season's gone on. They've got recruitment specialists. They've got Jason Wilcox. They've got Vivell. They've got, as I say, Omar Berrada, Dan Ashworth, all there. And you can't see we need a left back and a goal scorer. Awful. In the midst of all of this, in the build up to Ten Hag being sacked, there was things like job cuts and putting the prices of the tickets up, which I'm going to come back to the ticket prices in a minute. But the next big one really was sacking Ten Hag, which was the right call. But it was the right call born out of a mistake, that they should have made that decision in May. And if they'd have made that decision in May, they wouldn't have had to make that decision in October. So it's the right call, but it's the right call that was made to make up for a mistake that had been made earlier. Then the next thing is, well, what do you do then? Do you bring in an interim? Well, it's October. There's a long way to go in the season. We can salvage this season. We can do much better. So quite rightly, in my mind, they go out and they headhunt a good, young, ambitious coach who would be highly sought after by other clubs in Europe, and they appoint him in Ruben Amorim. I can't be a hypocrite and say I thought that was a bad decision, because I think it was a really strong decision, and showed a little bit of swagger, and showed for the first time a little bit of we're Man United, and if we want to go and get someone mid-season, we're going to go and get them. However, what they've done since with Amorim indicates that maybe it's not quite as good a decision as it appeared at the start, but I'm going to come back to that because I want to try and keep it in order and not flit around too much. The next thing they did was sack Dan Ashworth, which looks very strange on the face of it without being privy to all the information. He spent longer on gardening leave than he spent at United. Now, maybe Jim Ratcliffe had an opinion on Ashworth based on references and based on conversations he might have had with him, and an impression that he had of him perhaps was a false impression. And as he got to know him, he realised actually he's not what I thought he was. He's not delivered on the promises perhaps that he had when we first started. There is suggestions that he wanted Ten Hag to stay. There are suggestions that he wanted to replace Ten Hag with Graham Potter or Gareth Southgate. Well, there's a sackable offence straight off the bat. But I must say, as much as we don't know all of the information about this, and maybe there's a really good reason to sack him, it looks like a mess from the outside. So that doesn't particularly reflect well on INEOS. So that's another decision where perhaps you're thinking they've made a mistake there by appointing him in the first place. The ticket prices going up. £66 is not an astronomical amount of money for a Premier League football club. However, it's in really poor taste to put the ticket prices up when the team is playing so poorly. And not only that, but they've taken the concessions away from youngsters and from OAPs. So you're pricing out the next generation of fans from coming to United. My biggest issue with the ticket prices was what they said to, I think it was the 1958, they wrote a letter, an open letter, and let it get out to the public, saying that the reason we've got to put the ticket prices up and the reason we're cutting a lot of costs at the club is because our financial situation is quite poor, and we're sailing really close to the wind with PSR. Now, okay, why are we sailing close to the wind with PSR? Do we have problems with income? Can we not generate income? No, we've got the fourth biggest income in world football. So why have we got problems with PSR? I'll tell you why. One, financial mismanagement of the club in terms of incomings and outgoings and contracts we give players, which was decisions made by the Glazers, who should no longer be at the club, and if it wasn't for INEOS, they wouldn't be at the club. So that's one reason. The second reason is we're having to pay nearly £300 million. In the last couple of years, we've paid nearly £300 million in interest on debt repayments. So money is leaving our club and counting against our PSR rating to service a debt that comes from the owners who you, INEOS, have kept at the club. The club is £1 billion in debt. It owes £300 million in outstanding transfer fees. You gave the Glazers close to £1.5 billion. Now, apparently the Glazers were looking for strategic investment for Manchester United. Well, there's been no strategic investment into Manchester United. So they pocketed all of that themselves. So Jim Ratcliffe is pleading poverty on United's behalf when the owners of the football club have just received for that football club £1.5 billion. So this is where they completely lose my support. Why should Manchester United fans foot the bill for an ownership who have raped and pillaged the club for 20 years, and the person who's bailed them out and kept them there comes out and says, you have to pay more because we're sailing close to PSR. So the fans get punished for it. They are putting ticket prices up for us to watch turgid football because of a financial position that's been created by the owners, and the only reason the owners are still there is because of INEOS. It's an inability to read the room, or maybe just a case of not really caring. I don't know, maybe a bit of both. Going back to the chronological order of what's happened at the club. We get to January. Now this is the pivotal moment in terms of, was Amorim a good appointment in November, or should they have waited? But they didn't bought him anybody. We've had 3 months to assess Amorim and his team and whether or not they can play his style of football. Clearly they can't. We're really struggling. Clearly he needs players. Clearly loads of players need to be moved on. He's siphoned out quite a few players that he clearly doesn't want, who he's now still left with, in terms of, I think there's 5 or 6 there still, that he rarely ever plays. 2 of them because they're injured, but there's others that never play who are still there. And we haven't bought him a goal scorer. We've bought him a very raw left back. There's 3 or 4 other positions that need strengthening. Why did we not do that in January? Because we haven't got any money. So it comes back to that, doesn't it? Is that elite though? Is that an elite mentality to have, that you brought a manager in November who plays a specific style of football, the players that are currently there can't play that football, but you ain't got any money, so you can't bring anyone in to help him when we're 13th in the league and we have no goal scorer at the club? That's not elite, is it? Going back to we'll be competing again in 2 to 3 years. Well, we're in a year now and we're 13th. This is as bad as it's been, and it's getting worse. How are we going to be competing in now 1 or 2 years? The statement just looks ridiculous. Now, they're still not able to get rid of players. Still not able to get rid of Rashford permanently. Still not able to get rid of Anthony permanently. Malacia, Mount and Luke Shaw are sat there on 250 grand a week apiece, not kicking a ball. Shaw's played, I saw some the other day, something ridiculous, 90 minutes in a year. Mount's not much better in terms of his injury record. And they're still at the club. Why are they still at the club? Because we can't write off their contracts, because we haven't got any money. And in the summer, when there was a chance probably to sell them when they were fit, on a hope and a prayer, they thought, well, Luke Shaw's a good player when he's fit. We'll keep him. Just pray to the gods that he stays fit. You've got 10 years of evidence to say he can't stay fit. So I'd say he's a lovely bloke in when he's sober, but he gets pissed every night. Luke Shaw's a brilliant player when he's fit. He's not fit. Never fit. For me, the price hike of the tickets, cutting charitable donations, all the cost cutting, and I must say, their inability to operate in the transfer market in a way that helps this team and squad to develop moving forward for the rest of the season. They haven't been able to do that. All of those things just come back to that point I made early doors. They didn't have the money to do what needs to be done in the first place. And all of those things also do not create an elite culture. And they do not give me any confidence that in 2 to 3 years' time from now, let alone from a year ago, we'll be competing. It's an utter nonsense. Two years ago, at the end of the January transfer window, Ten Hag's first season, Ronaldo had left, and we were skint. Clearly we were skint. Right at the end of the window, we got Wout Weghorst in on loan. I think it cost about £1 or £2 million in terms of a loan fee. João Felix was available on loan, but we couldn't afford, I think it was about 8 million, something like that. So we went to Chelsea. 2 years on, we're in exactly the same position. We are no better off financially, despite a 1.5 billion cash injection that essentially went straight to the Glazers. As I said before, Man United have the 4th best income in world football. You think to yourself, how can we generate more money then? Is it a problem is generating money a problem? It's not. Man United's commercial revenues through the roof. We've got a bumper deal with Adidas. We have a bumper deal with Snapdragon. We have coffee companies that sponsor us, biscuit companies that sponsor us, beer companies, betting companies, condom companies, you name it, we've got it. Massive contracts with different sponsors. 4th highest revenue in world football. So where's that going, I'd like to know? It's servicing debt created by the Glazers. It's almost as if INEOS have come in and the lack of money is a surprise to them. The dire situation we're in is a surprise to them. Certainly by the way Jim Ratcliffe spoke in that interview in February of 2024. But the truth is he knew what was going on. He knew the problems. In which case, why has he said what he said? People go, don't be naive. It's propaganda, it's a manifesto. He's trying to keep people on side. Yeah, I understand all that. I'm not worked behind the ears. But when you lie, which he did, lies catch up with you. Tell you why Sir Jim Ratcliffe's coasting and is fine. Because Man United fans won't pick him up on it. Man United fans won't do anything about it. But he's a liar. So this is my take on the year of INEOS, and I'm just going to say it. He's a liar. He said, and gave the impression, that he wanted to make Man United an elite football club again. He said that in 2 to 3 years' time, we're going to be competing at the very highest level. Done nothing in a year to suggest that's true. And there isn't the money to do it. And he knew there wasn't the money to do it. Do you know what I'd have loved him to say? Instead, something along the lines of, look, the situation at the club's pretty dire at the moment financially. We're here just to kind of settle things down. We're going to have to make some tough decisions. Right now, we haven't got the money needed to do what you probably want us to do. But if you stick with us and you bear with us, what we're going to do is try and solve a few of these problems and from there make incremental improvements. That's all we can promise at the moment. Because that's true. Now, if they'd have said that, there's a lot of people that would have gone, we could have had Qatar. And he's saying about not having enough money and that he's just going to try and settle things down and he's going to try and solve some problems. If we stick with him, there'll be incremental improvements. Well, that doesn't inspire me with confidence. But do you know what? As time went by, most United fans would go, do you know what? At least he was honest. Because that's the truth, what I just said there. That's the truth. He didn't, did he? Didn't say anything close to that. He gave the impression that he could oversee Manchester United becoming an elite football club again. It's the absolute opposite of that. You don't become elite when you fire sale your academy products, which you tried to do in January and will do again in the summer by all accounts. When you haven't got any money to make additions to help your new manager, when you put ticket prices up, when you cut loads of costs and cut loads of corners, when you scrimp and you're miserly, certain things have to be done. We are probably a more efficient football club because of some of those decisions that they've made. But those cuts that they've made are neither here nor there in terms of actual proper money that needs to come into the club. And actually, they wouldn't need to be made in the first place if we didn't have such a large amount of debt to pay interest on because of the Glazers. So, as far as I'm concerned, with INEOS, they chose to do this deal. So don't cry poverty to me. The club shouldn't have any poverty attached to it because you gave the owners of the football club £1.5 billion knowing full well they were going to pocket all of it. We're no better off financially than we were 2 years ago. If anything, we're probably worse. And it all comes back to the Glazers. You know, when we were still in the process of what's going to happen, is it going to be a full takeover, is it going to be a minority stake, is it going to be INEOS, is it going to be a hedge fund? An American hedge fund, what they call the Elliott Group, were linked with United. And there was absolute uproar about it at the time. There was uproar about 25% with Sir Jim Ratcliffe, but that's not carried on. All INEOS are doing is the same thing that hedge fund would have done. The difference is, it's more palatable, not to me, but it's more palatable to a lot of United fans because it's our Jim from down the road, from Manchester, supported United all his life. And I don't doubt, by the way, that he was a United supporter as a kid. And I don't doubt that he probably has come in with intentions to make United better. But it's no different to what would have happened if we'd have had a hedge fund. So what now? We have to go back to something that I said in October of 2023. In fact, I said it in the summer of 2023. I said it in October of 2023. I said it in the winter of 2024. I said it all the way along. In the summer / autumn of 2023, Man United at that point in time needed £3 billion injected into it. Not the Glazers, Manchester United needed that. Because we have a £1 billion of debt which needs to be cleared, and there's £2 billion that needs to be spent on Carrington and the stadium. Once that's done, the club, as I say, it's got the 4th biggest income in world football. The income that the club can generate will provide funds for squad development. Or maybe 3 billion is a conservative estimate and it needs more than that, but I would say about 3 billion. Because once you sort those other things out, we generate quite a lot of income anyway, when you're not having to then pay off debt, which counts against your PSR. So it needed 3 billion. Jim Ratcliffe put £230 million in. 10 times less the amount than what is needed. The maths don't work. It doesn't add up. If you put in 1/10 of what's needed and you still have the Glazers there and you still have the debt and you still have all those problems that are attached to it, then what do you expect to happen? People just want it to be okay, so then therefore think it's going to be okay. No one can answer me the question, how are they going to do this? They haven't got the funds to do it. And I've just given you, okay, it's my opinion, but a catalogue of decisions that they've got wrong, independent of whether they've got enough money or not. It all interlinks, but they've made a catalogue of decisions that they've got wrong. So they're not even particularly good at what they do. So what happens in the future is, for me, as I said before, people can say, well, they'll put naming rights on the stadium. We've got loads of money coming in through commerce and commercial deals. Generating money isn't a problem for Man United. It's where it goes that's the problem, and that's not going to change while the Glazers are still here. So where are we suddenly going to be able to compete? We're not. And what will happen, in my opinion, is, I don't know when, but at some point in the next 5 years, there'll be a true financial crisis at United where we're close to the wall. And what will happen is they'll either find a creative way of loading more debt onto the club, they'll seek new investment again, which will just muddy the waters and blur lines even more, where it just gets more and more diluted, where it'll be Glazers own a certain amount, INEOS own a certain amount, another person owns a certain amount, and that still will not lead us to the success that we need. Or maybe they'll go. But they will hang on for as long as they can, the Glazers. But one thing's for certain, this Mission 21 nonsense that the club have come out with, Mission 21 as in winning the 21st Premier League title, is in cloud cuckoo land. Depending on what you read, there's a target for our 150th anniversary to win the league by 2028. Come on. I don't know what to say, really. I mean, so next year, this season, we're 13th. We ain't getting in the top half this season. So next season, 2025 to 26, if we get in the top half, that's an improvement. 2026 to 27, I believe you have to compete for a title before you can win one. So what are we going to go from just about finishing in the top half to then finishing right near the top of the league but falling short, and then in 2028 we're going to win it? When you need a fire sale, getting rid of academy players because you haven't got any money. Apparently they're bringing a scientist, some psychology scientist of some kind or other that Dave Brailsford knows, who's going to magically help United win Mission 21. You need a squad that can play football. We haven't got one. We need to get rid of probably 7 or 8 players in the summer. which means you need to bring in 7 or 8 players, or at least bring in 4 or 5 and then supplement the rest with young players. So you can have all the scientists in the world. If you haven't got any money, you can't get rid of players who are on big wages because you can't supplement their wages, or you can't take reduced transfer fees because you haven't got any money because of the mistakes made by the Glazers before. You're not going to get rid of those players. The players are shit. How is this going to happen? Magically just going to happen? It's not, is it? I don't say this lightly, and I'm not saying it to be sensationalist. United are more likely to get relegated by 2028 than they are to win the league by 2028. That's just common sense. We're far closer to relegation than we are to winning titles, and there's no sunshine in the distance to say this is going to change. I've no evidence from the first year to suggest it's going to change, and that this is anything other than just crisis management and avoiding bankruptcy. So how's that going to change moving forward? There'll be incremental improvements in our financial situation, but while we're laden with the debt that we've got, it'll be incremental. And incremental is not enough. We need a vast improvement in our financial situation. Or the club needs to start putting money that the club generates in the club back into the club's coffers instead of the Glazers. So the Glazers are the enemy of our football club. So the enemy of our football club owns it. That's a really difficult position to be in. And therefore, because INEOS have chosen to team up with the Glazers and front up for the Glazers, like a hedge fund would, except Jim Ratcliffe's from Manchester, then therefore they're an enemy of the football club. But the Glazers are a disease, and that disease needs to be removed. The Glazers just keep us on life support. We need the disease to be removed to come back to full health. And I remain steadfast in that opinion. One of the big issues we've got, fans won't do anything about it. And that hurts, I must say. It's been an issue for some time. What is being done to our club is criminal. And the authorities won't protect us from it. But we won't fight. We won't fight for it. I think for fear of appearing spoiled, or for fear of appearing like we don't get behind the team when things are difficult and that we can't swallow a bit of a tough time. I can swallow a tough time. I'll get behind the team. But there needs to be a strategic, sustainable, militant operation to remove the owners of the club. And there wasn't an appetite for it when the Glazers had 1 foot out the door 2 and a bit years ago. There wasn't an appetite for it then. Not enough United fans are prepared to sacrifice and prepared to compromise. I'll tell you now, if United fans could organise, not a full boycott, because that ain't ever going to happen, but if you have, let's say, half of the ground empty, even better, 3/4 of the ground empty, for 4 or 5 games in a row, that would have an instantaneous impact in one of 2 ways. Either the owners would change their behaviour drastically, or they'd leave, or they'd look to leave, because sponsors won't have that. Whether or not the tickets have already been paid for and then people leave empty seats, sponsors like Adidas will not have a club the size of Manchester United 4 or 5 games in a row with an attendance of 38,000 and a half empty stadium, knowing that the reason is it's a protest against the owners. They would ask serious questions about that, plus the poor performance on the pitch and everything else that the sponsors would question. If you could get it down to 20,000 people in the stadium, the sponsors would have even more to say on that. But no one's prepared to do it. No one's prepared to miss 4 games. So I'm afraid we're going to have to play the long game, which brings us back to within the next 5 years, they'll either load more debt onto the club, they'll seek more investment from someone else, or maybe, if we're lucky, they'll sell up. But bringing it back to a year of INEOS, if it wasn't for INEOS doing what they've done so they could get a piece of the pie, we'd be a year into replenished rude health by now from a full takeover. And when the takeover saga was going on, I invested so much time and hope and energy and negotiating with whatever greater being there is to pray that this nightmare of having the Glazers as our owners would end. And INEOS are responsible for that not happening. Now, if they came in then and did a fantastic job, did a stellar job, had money to do what needed to be done, then okay, we accept that. As I've just alluded to over the last half an hour or so, they haven't done that. So their first year has been absolute unmitigated failure. There's nothing elite about them. They don't have the finances to do what needs to be done. Their decision making is poor. And the statement about being competitive again in 2 or 3 years looks utterly ludicrous. Let me know what you think. Thanks for bearing with me if you did. Glazers out.